Raghav Malhotra, Ananya Iyer, Suresh Iyer, and the unsuspecting guests all gathered under a perfect sky for a wedding that promised joy. But in a single shocking moment, that celebration turned into a nightmare no one would ever forget. Please give me power with subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. The wedding took place in a quiet town in the United States, far away from the busy cities and noise. The venue was an open garden near a calm lake, chosen carefully to feel peaceful and beautiful. White flowers covered the entrance, and soft lights were hung across tall trees. Everything looked like a dream that had taken months of planning. Guests from different parts of the world arrived early, dressed in colorful Indian outfits, excited to witness a wedding that blended Indian traditions with an American setting. The groom, Raghav Malhotra, stood at the center of this celebration. He was a software engineer who had built his life in the USA over the past 10 years. Hard work and long nights had helped him achieve stability and respect in his field. Friends described him as quiet and focused. He believed strongly in independence and modern values. For him, this wedding was not just about love, but also about proving that he had succeeded far from home. The bride, Ananya Iyer, looked calm but thoughtful as she prepared for the ceremony. She had moved to the United States for higher education and later found work in healthcare administration. She believed in balancing tradition with freedom. This marriage meant a new chapter, one she chose for herself. While she respected her family deeply, she had learned to make her own decisions in a country that encouraged independence. Relatives from India filled the venue with excitement. Many had never visited the United States before. They took photos, admired the scenery, and spoke proudly about how far the family had come. Laughter echoed through the garden. Food stalls offered Indian dishes mixed with American flavors. Everything appeared joyful on the surface. Ananya's father, Suresh Iyer, observed the surroundings quietly. He had arrived from India only a few days earlier. He wore a traditional outfit and maintained a composed posture. To others, he appeared like a proud father watching his daughter start a new life. He greeted guests politely and followed every ritual carefully. No one noticed anything unusual about his behavior. The wedding planner checked every detail to make sure the ceremony ran smoothly. The priest prepared for the rituals. The photographer moved around capturing smiles and emotional moments. The weather was perfect, with a gentle breeze and clear skies. It felt like nothing could go wrong. As the ceremony was about to begin, the guests settled into their seats. The atmosphere was full of hope and celebration. No one could imagine that within moments, this carefully planned wedding would turn into a scene of fear and tragedy. What was meant to be remembered as a joyful union was unknowingly standing on the edge of a life-changing disaster. Suresh Iyer had always been known as a man of control and discipline. In his hometown in India, people respected him for his strict values and orderly life. He believed that a father's duty was to guide his family firmly, even if it meant making difficult decisions. When he arrived in the United States for his daughter's wedding, he carried the same mindset with him. On the outside, he looked calm, composed, and respectful, but inside his thoughts were restless and heavy. From the moment he stepped into the wedding venue, Suresh felt out of place. The open garden, the relaxed atmosphere, and the mix of cultures made him uncomfortable. He believed weddings should be simple, controlled, and fully guided by elders. Here, everything felt too free, too modern. Watching guests laugh freely and move without structure made him feel like he was losing authority, not only over the event, but over his daughter's life. Suresh had never truly accepted Raghav Malhotra. He believed Raghav represented a world that pulled children away from their roots. To him, Raghav's independent lifestyle in America was not success, but rebellion. Suresh felt that his opinions had been ignored during the marriage decision. The wedding was planned quickly, and most choices were made without his approval. This silence hurt him more than open disagreement. As the ceremony preparations continued, Suresh kept his emotions hidden. He smiled when required and nodded politely when spoken to. Guests saw him as a quiet father, possibly emotional about giving his daughter away. No one suspected the storm inside his mind. He replayed past moments again and again, convincing himself that he had failed as a father by allowing this marriage to happen. His anger was not loud or obvious. It was slow, controlled, and deeply rooted. He believed he was watching his daughter walk toward a future filled with risk. In his thoughts, America was a place where families broke easily and traditions disappeared. He feared that Ananya would slowly drift away from him forever. This fear turned into resentment, and that resentment began to feel like a threat he needed to stop. Suresh spent long moments standing alone, watching Raghav interact with guests. Every smile and gesture from the groom felt like proof that his daughter no longer needed him. This realization hurt more than he expected. Instead of questioning his own beliefs, Suresh blamed the man who stood beside his daughter. What no one realized was that Suresh's silence was not peace, it was pressure building quietly. Each passing minute added weight to his thoughts. He believed he was the only one who could see the danger ahead. In his mind, doing nothing felt like betrayal. As the ceremony drew closer, his sense of responsibility twisted into something dark, setting the stage for an act that would change every life present that day forever. Years before the wedding, Suresh Iyer's life had taken a quiet but damaging turn. In India, he had once been financially stable and confident, running small business investments alongside his regular work. He trusted people easily, believing that honesty and discipline protected him from loss. That belief shattered when a business partner disappeared with a large sum of money, leaving Suresh with debt and legal trouble. The case dragged on for years and ended without justice. He never spoke openly about this failure, but it stayed with him like a permanent wound. After that loss, Suresh became deeply suspicious of others. He began to believe that the world rewarded clever deception more than hard work. Every unfamiliar decision felt like a potential trap. Even within his family, he started questioning intentions. This change was slow, almost invisible, but it shaped the way he saw everything. By the time Ananya decided to move to the United States for her studies, Suresh was already struggling with fear masked as concern. Living alone after his wife's death worsened his mental state. His days became quiet and repetitive. Without realizing it, he spent more time thinking than interacting. News stories about crime, broken families, and failed marriages in foreign countries fed his anxiety. He connected these stories to his daughter's life abroad, imagining dangers that did not exist. Each unanswered phone call and delayed message increased his worry, slowly turning care into control. When Ananya told him about Raghav, Suresh began researching silently. He searched for stories of men who changed after marriage, of women who lost contact with their parents, of relationships that ended in disaster. He ignored positive examples completely. In his mind, Raghav became a symbol of everything he feared losing. Without ever meeting him properly, Suresh decided that this man could not be trusted. His thoughts grew darker after he arrived in the United States weeks before the wedding. The freedom he saw around him confused and frightened him. People lived without visible rules, without elders guiding every step. To Suresh, this felt dangerous. He believed this environment encouraged selfishness and disrespect. Instead of seeing happiness, he saw warning signs everywhere. During this time, Suresh began writing notes to himself. They were not plans, but reflections filled with fear, regret, and imagined responsibility. He wrote about protecting family honor, about preventing irreversible mistakes. He convinced himself that a single moment could decide the future of many lives. These writings were never shared. They remained locked inside his suitcase, just like the thoughts inside his mind. What made this situation more dangerous was that Suresh did not believe he was acting out of anger. He believed he was acting out of duty. This belief gave him a false sense of clarity. The line between protection and harm disappeared slowly, without warning. By the time the wedding day arrived, Suresh no longer questioned his thoughts. He believed he was the only one brave enough to face what others refused to see, unaware that his past pain had distorted his sense of reality completely. The ceremony began exactly as planned, with guests seated in neat rows facing the decorated space near the lake. Soft music played in the background, blending with the natural sounds of water and wind. The priest prepared the ritual items while photographers moved quietly, capturing moments that looked calm and joyful. Everyone's attention was focused on the couple standing together, ready to begin a new life. The atmosphere felt sacred, filled with expectation and emotion. Raghav stood confidently, his posture steady and his expression calm. He believed the hardest parts of his journey were already behind him. The challenges of building a life in another country, earning respect at work, and convincing families on both sides had led to this moment. To him, the ceremony was a finish line. He felt relief more than excitement, believing that once the rituals were complete, life would finally settle into something peaceful and predictable. Ananya stood beside him, her hands steady but her thoughts racing. She noticed her father sitting quietly among the guests. His expression was unreadable, but she assumed it was emotion. She believed time would soften his resistance, that this wedding would heal the distance between them. She had no reason to believe otherwise. The day looked perfect, and nothing in front of her suggested danger. Suresh sat still, his body unmoving while his mind raced. The sounds around him felt distant, almost unreal. The rituals unfolding before him seemed slow, as if time had stretched. Every movement felt heavy with meaning. He watched his daughter participate in traditions he valued deeply, yet he felt she was slipping away with each step. In his thoughts, this moment was no longer a celebration, but a final point of no return. As the priest prepared for the next ritual, a strange calm settled over Suresh. The fear and confusion that had followed him for weeks suddenly felt organized. His thoughts aligned into a single belief that action was necessary. To him, waiting felt dangerous. Doing nothing felt like abandoning his duty as a father. The noise of the crowd faded into silence inside his head. The moment came without warning. A sharp sound cut through the air, louder than the music and stronger than the murmurs of the crowd. For a split second, no one understood what had happened. Then panic erupted. Guests froze, then moved in confusion. Some screamed, others ran, and a few stood rooted in shock. Raghav collapsed near the ceremonial space, his body falling forward as the celebration shattered around him. The white decorations were stained, and the calm setting turned into chaos. The photographer's camera dropped to the ground, plates shattered. The priest stepped back in disbelief. Suresh stood where he was, no longer hidden by the crowd. In his hand was a firearm, legally owned but disastrously misused. His face showed no triumph, only emptiness. The silence he had carried for so long had exploded into irreversible action. Within moments, the wedding ceased to exist. What remained was fear, confusion, and the realization that a single act had destroyed countless lives. The garden that had promised happiness now held a moment that would never be forgotten, marking the exact second when love, trust, and family collapsed into tragedy. The moment after the gunshot felt unreal, as if time had broken into pieces. Guests reacted in different ways, driven by pure instinct. Some dropped to the ground, others ran toward the exits, and a few stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The joyful music stopped abruptly, replaced by screams, frantic movement, and the sound of objects falling. The peaceful garden no longer looked beautiful. It looked dangerous and confusing. Several guests rushed toward Raghav, who lay motionless near the ceremonial space. Blood spread across his wedding clothes, shocking everyone who came close. Hands trembled as people tried to help without knowing what to do. Phones were pulled out, and emergency calls were made in panic. The carefully planned ceremony dissolved into disorder within seconds. Decorations were knocked over, chairs were scattered, and personal belongings were left behind as people focused only on survival. Ananya remained near the center of the chaos, unable to move. Her mind struggled to accept what her eyes were seeing. The image of her husband on the ground and her father standing nearby broke her sense of reality. Everything she believed about family and safety collapsed at once. She felt detached, as if watching a scene that did not belong to her life. Shock kept her silent while the world around her rushed forward. Security personnel from the venue acted quickly and contacted local law enforcement. Police cars arrived within minutes, their flashing lights cutting through the afternoon calm. Officers secured the area and ordered everyone to step back. The garden was turned into a controlled scene, no longer a wedding venue, but an active crime location. Yellow tape replaced flower decorations, and the air felt heavy with fear and disbelief. Suresh Iyer did not attempt to flee. He remained standing where he was when officers approached him. His posture was stiff, his expression blank. He allowed himself to be taken into custody without resistance. As he was escorted away, guests watched in silence, struggling to understand how a respected father could become the cause of such destruction. The man who had arrived as a guest of honor left in handcuffs. Paramedics worked urgently to stabilize Raghav before transporting him to the nearest hospital. Sirens echoed as the ambulance left the scene, carrying hope mixed with uncertainty. Doctors would later describe his condition as critical. Every minute mattered, and no one knew if he would survive the injuries. For the families involved, time slowed into painful waiting. Witnesses were separated and questioned by police. Each person shared fragmented memories of the moment, struggling to describe something that felt impossible. Phones were collected, and videos taken during the ceremony became evidence. What was once meant to capture happiness now documented tragedy. By the end of the day, the wedding was no longer discussed as a celebration. It became a criminal case. News spread quickly through social media and local reports, shocking both Indian and American communities. A single moment of violence had erased months of preparation and replaced it with grief, confusion, and questions that would take years to answer. In the days following the shooting, the investigation moved quickly, driven by the public nature of the crime and the shock surrounding it. Detectives reviewed every detail, from security footage at the venue to videos recorded by guests during the ceremony. Each frame was examined carefully, replayed again and again to understand how such an act could happen in a place filled with family and celebration. What initially appeared to be a simple case of sudden rage slowly revealed deeper layers. Police searched Suresh Iyer's temporary residence in the United States. Inside his suitcase and personal belongings, they found handwritten notes folded carefully and kept separate from other items. These notes were not aggressive in tone. They spoke of fear, responsibility, and regret. He had written about protecting his daughter, about preventing irreversible damage, and about carrying the burden alone. There was no mention of hatred or revenge. This discovery surprised investigators and changed the direction of the case. Further background checks revealed that Suresh had legally purchased the firearm weeks before the wedding. He had passed all required checks, attended safety training, and followed regulations. This raised an important question. If everything had been done legally, what had pushed him to use the weapon in such a public and destructive way? Investigators began to look beyond the crime itself and into Suresh's mental state. Medical records from India showed a history of anxiety-related treatment that had stopped years earlier. After his wife's death and financial losses, Suresh had withdrawn socially but never sought consistent help. Friends and relatives described him as increasingly fearful and controlling, though never violent. Psychologists reviewing the case suggested that long-term stress, untreated mental illness, and isolation may have distorted his judgment. His belief that he was protecting his daughter appeared sincere, though deeply flawed. This assessment added complexity to the case. Prosecutors acknowledged that Suresh may not have acted out of simple anger. However, they also made it clear that belief alone could not excuse violence. The investigation focused on whether his mental condition impaired his ability to understand the consequences of his actions. This question would later become central in court proceedings. Meanwhile, the evidence continued to grow. Digital records showed that Suresh had been reading extreme online content related to family honor, loss of control, and fear of cultural erosion. These materials reinforced his existing beliefs and deepened his sense of urgency. Investigators concluded that his worldview had narrowed over time, leaving no space for alternative perspectives. The case began to shift in public discussion. What started as a shocking act of violence turned into a broader conversation about mental health, cultural conflict, and access to weapons. Media coverage highlighted the warning signs that had gone unnoticed. The wedding shooting was no longer just about one moment. It became an example of how silent struggles, when ignored, could lead to irreversible consequences. By the end of the investigation phase, one thing was clear. This was not a crime driven by impulse alone. It was the result of years of fear, loss, and untreated pain coming together at the worst possible moment, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. Raghav Malhotra's survival was nothing short of miraculous. After being rushed to the hospital, he underwent multiple surgeries to address the gunshot wounds that had damaged vital organs and left severe internal injuries. Doctors worked tirelessly, knowing that every minute could make the difference between life and death. The medical team described his condition as critical, with a high risk of permanent disability, but Raghav's resilience and will to live began to show signs of hope. Family members from both India and the United States stayed by his side, their faces a mix of fear, grief, and relief. Even after stabilizing, Raghav faced a long and painful recovery. The injuries left lasting physical consequences. He could no longer continue in his previous career as a software engineer due to mobility limitations caused by nerve damage. This loss of independence added another layer of emotional strain. Every day was a struggle, not only with physical pain, but also with the psychological aftermath of nearly losing his life in front of friends and family. Sleep was interrupted by flashbacks of the wedding, and moments that once brought joy now reminded him of trauma. Ananya's life also changed permanently. Her relationship with her father had been destroyed in a single act. The bond she had trusted since childhood was gone, replaced by a mix of betrayal and sorrow. She had to navigate a life where her father was both absent and responsible for the most traumatic experience of her adult life. The sense of safety she had always associated with family was shattered, leaving her to cope with grief while supporting her injured husband. The wedding, which had been meant to mark a beginning, became a reference point for loss and fear. Suresh Iyer faced legal consequences almost immediately. Though he had acted under the belief that he was protecting his daughter, the court ruled that this could not justify the use of deadly force. He was charged with attempted murder, unlawful discharge of a firearm, and endangering public safety. His prior mental health concerns were considered during the trial, but ultimately, the law emphasized accountability for actions, not intentions. His legal team highlighted his lifelong fear of losing control and his genuine, but misguided, desire to protect Ananya, but this could not outweigh the evidence of violence. The trial attracted widespread attention, both in India and the United States. Legal analysts debated the case, focusing on the tension between cultural values, mental health, and responsibility under American law. Psychologists testified about Suresh's state of mind, describing it as a combination of untreated anxiety, obsession, and distorted perception of reality. The prosecution argued that regardless of mental state, Suresh's act was premeditated in the sense that he had brought the weapon to the wedding with intent to use it. Public discussions became a mix of empathy for a troubled father and condemnation for a violent act. Even with the legal proceedings underway, the human cost remained. Raghav's recovery continued to be painful and slow, and Ananya had to rebuild her life while coping with profound loss. The wedding that had promised joy and new beginnings became a lasting memory of trauma. Every holiday, anniversary, and family gathering reminded them of what had been destroyed in a single moment. By the end of this chapter in their lives, the consequences were clear. Survival did not erase pain, and legal justice could not restore trust or family bonds. The aftermath of one impulsive act created ripples that would last for years, shaping not only the victims but everyone who had witnessed the tragedy. The aftermath of the wedding shooting left a scar not only on the immediate family but on everyone who had attended. The garden that had once been filled with laughter and celebration was now a symbol of tragedy. Flowers wilted, decorations were removed, and the space became a place of silent reflection for those who returned to see what had happened. Conversations that once focused on joy and union turned to grief, shock, and disbelief. The memory of the gunshot lingered in everyone's mind, a reminder of how quickly life could change. Ananya struggled the most. She had lost the man she had trusted as a father and had nearly lost the man she had chosen as a husband. Every photograph from the wedding reminded her of what was destroyed in an instant. Family gatherings became tense, filled with unspoken sorrow. Even the relatives who had traveled from India could not fully process the event. They tried to support Ananya and Raghav, but the trauma was too deep to mend with words alone. Her sense of safety, once taken for granted, was shattered forever. Raghav's survival brought relief, but it also carried a heavy burden. The permanent injuries forced him to rethink his future, his career, and his independence. The couple's dreams of building a life together in a foreign land suddenly seemed fragile. Simple routines became challenges, and every visit to the hospital reminded them of the fragility of life. Despite this, Raghav showed resilience. His determination to recover physically and emotionally inspired Ananya to continue moving forward, even in the shadow of trauma. Suresh's arrest and trial made the case a national headline. The media highlighted the unusual combination of cultural tension, family pressure, and mental health issues leading to violence. News outlets discussed how mental illness, when left untreated, could result in catastrophic consequences. In India, the story sparked debates about the influence of cultural expectations on family dynamics abroad. In the United States, conversations focused on gun access, responsibility, and the signs of untreated mental health conditions. The story became more than a single crime. It became a lesson in prevention and awareness. Friends and distant relatives struggled to make sense of the tragedy. Social media was filled with commentary, sympathy, and shock. Some criticized Suresh harshly, while others tried to understand his perspective. What remained clear to everyone was that a family celebration had transformed into a public tragedy overnight. The wedding no longer symbolized unity, but had become an example of how underlying tensions and unresolved fears could explode with devastating consequences. Psychologists and legal experts later described the event as a case study in compounded stress, unresolved trauma, and distorted judgment. It illustrated how past failures and unaddressed mental health struggles could intersect with cultural expectations to produce violent outcomes. The wedding, once a personal celebration, became a cautionary tale for families everywhere about communication, mental health, and understanding. Years later, the story remained in public memory. Ananya and Raghav rebuilt their lives slowly, carrying the weight of what had happened. Suresh's actions left permanent consequences for himself and his family. The wedding that was supposed to unite hearts had instead separated lives, leaving an indelible mark on everyone involved. It was remembered not for love or joy, but as a stark warning of how fear, obsession, and silence can turn the happiest moments into tragedy.